Should you buy the Nikon Z50II? Whether you're buying this as your first standalone camera or as an upgrade from a DSLR or other mirrorless camera. In this video, I hope to answer that question and give you my opinion on it after using it for 2 months and hopefully help you to make a more informed purchase decision. I'm also working on a full review of the Nikon Z52 as well as a comparison to the Nikon Z50. So if you want a more in-depth take on that, make sure you subscribe to this channel so you don't miss those when they come out in a few weeks' time. The Nikon Z52 was announced in November 2024 and I took delivery at the start of December 2024. So as I said, I've had this for 2 months. It is a nice upgrade to the Nikon Z50, a camera that I really enjoyed using. I think the thing that really draws me to this camera is with the 16 to 50mm kit lens, it is pocketable in sort of like a winter coat. It'll fit in most pockets. It'll fit in the majority of small bags. It has a solid 20.9 megapixel sensor, which although it's getting on a bit, it was originally released, I believe, a derivative of it in the Nikon D500, which has now been around a while. It's still doing a really good job, and the main upgrade here is that this has Nikon's EXPEED 7 image processor, which gives you a huge load of upgrades with regards to autofocus and with regards to some of the customization that we didn't have before. Now this camera will cost you £850, which is arguably a lot of money, but if we're brutally honest, this camera is practically inflation proof because the original Z50 launched at £850 as well, so it hasn't actually seen a price increase, at least not in the UK, which I think is really cool. I'm so glad that Nikon didn't decide to put the price up like they did from the Z6II to Z6III. I think it would have put a lot of people off buying this camera, and hopefully at £850 it's just slightly more achievable for a lot more people than it would have been if it was over £1,000. Now, the reason why I like the Z50 and now the Z52 so much isn't just its size, it's the fact it doesn't actually compromise on what it's capable of doing. Having recently reviewed the Nikon Z6III, link to that above if you want to check that out, this is so similar to that camera. Yes, it has a cropped sensor, but other than that, it just feels the same. The autofocus is just as snappy. In fact, it has slightly more autofocus modes than the Z6III does. It has bird detection, which for some reason is currently omitted on the Z6III, so I hope it will be added in a firmware update. It has the same style fully articulating screen, excellent if you want to do like a selfie or vlog with this camera, also really great if you want to just have a bit more flexibility when you're shooting. It has a brighter electronic viewfinder over the Z50. It's twice as bright, so it's easier to take photos in bright situations like in daylight, in bright sunlight. And it's also gained things like pre-capture, which allows you to take photo before you press the shutter button up to 1 second, and that at 30 frames per second, though only in JPEG only mode. It's a really capable camera. It is the fact it has everything I need without weight or indeed being hugely cumbersome. If you pair this with the 27mm prime lens that Nikon's offers for the DX systems, it's kind of a really small 35mm street photography setup, but with no compromises. If you like shooting video, this camera really is a huge upgrade on the Z50, and again, it's borrowed so much from the Z8 and Z6III. You can shoot 10-bit N-Log at H.265, which is a nice file system to work. The quality's great. In fact, I've recorded probably like the last 5 or 6 reviews of this camera, and it just is solid. It looks fantastic. The video is great, and the autofocus is so much better in video as well. The autofocus in the original Z50 for video was horrible. I very, very rarely use this, except at best as a C camera. The Z52 will happily use that as an A camera. It is that good in my opinion. Other things that you might like is if you're coming from an existing Nikon Z camera, it now has the more standardized button layout on the back following more the Z6III and Z8. It makes this easier to switch between those 2 cameras or 3 cameras. I really like that because the original Z50 had some odd touch controls and it was missing buttons and it was a bit of a mess. But thankfully Nikon's done away with that. The Z52 is just much more fun. One thing that the Z50II doesn't have, which the Z50 also didn't have, is in-body image stabilisation. Now, IBIS is something that a lot of people were probably hoping to see in the Z50, and I think we're going to have to wait for a higher-end DX sensor camera from Nikon to get that, but I don't think it's as important as a lot of people might have you believe. If you are likely to just be using the Nikon zoom lenses for DX Z-mount cameras, like the 16-50 or the 18-140 or the 50-250, all of those have vibration reduction built in. If you use a lens that doesn't have VR built in, yes, you're going to have to use techniques to take sharper pictures while hand holding, perhaps using a faster shutter speed, perhaps using a tripod. But then again, the majority of Nikon's DSLRs, well, in fact, all of them didn't have in-body image stabilization, and we all seem to get good photos there too. And as useful as it is on something like the Z8 or the Z6II, I honestly don't think that it is the be-all and end-all. So not having IBIS, although would be nice, is fine, especially if you're going to use any of the kit lenses. Something I've picked up on with other reviews is battery life, and I think that's really interesting, and it's worth us taking a couple of minutes to discuss that. Nikon has upgraded the battery in this camera from the EN-EL25 to the EN-EL25A. It's a higher capacity version of that battery, but in theory, officially, the sort of calculation that is used as a standard across the industry says this will take less photos than the Z50 on a single charge. Mostly because the processor is much more power hungry. And I think a lot of reviewers have lent into that and have talked about how the battery life's not very good. But I actually think there's something else here. As a long-time user of the Z50, and now the Z52 after 2 months, they both do a horrible job of reporting how much battery life they have. The Z52 will go from 3 bars to 2 bars to red, single bar, really quickly, like sometimes within half an hour of shooting video. But it'll continue working for another half an hour without any problems. I went out 2 weekends ago in the really cold weather. It was like -5, -6. For the UK, that's really cold. And I went out, I knew the battery was fully charged, and within like 45 minutes or an hour, the battery had gone to red, and I was like, great, I'm gonna run out of battery, this is really annoying. And I just kept on using the camera, and it never ran out of battery. And I used it for another hour and a half without any problems. So I wonder if a lot of the reviewers have seen it go down to red and then thought, damn, I have to change the battery now, and have done so, or have gone to charge the camera and never actually kept on using it. I just think this misreports its battery life. I think the Z50 did the same, because I had the exact same experience on the Z50 on multiple occasions. So here is my solution to you. Buy another battery. This is an EN-EL25 from SmallRig. It's pretty cheap. It's actually the same capacity as the EN-EL25A. It's higher capacity than the original EN-EL25. Pop this in your bag fully charged. You can charge it with USB-C, so it's really easy to keep it charged. And use it once this fully runs out of battery. And I mean, wait until the camera shuts off, then pop the new battery in. You're probably going to find that 1 battery is enough for the majority of your outings, and worst case scenario, you can use 2. Now, if you're going to be shooting a lot of film, here's my top tip. This camera now has a USB-C port up from a micro USB in the original Z50, and it can be powered by a simple power delivery power bank. A portable power bank that you use for your phone will work great on this. A USB-C cable into the power bank, the other side into the camera, and it'll run for hours and hours on a 10,000 milliamp hour battery. Use that. It is a great way of continuing to use your camera even when you think that you're going to need to, take multiple batteries. A power bank will solve that problem really easily. If you turn the camera off between shots, it'll charge itself with the battery, but even if you have it switched on, it will power itself from the battery as well. It's a great option. I really recommend doing that. Whilst we're talking about the ports, the USB-C port can also be used as a webcam. This is plug and play as a webcam, which is really handy, though I'd argue use an external microphone because the internal one isn't fantastic. But it now has a headphone port on it. So not only can you add a microphone, you can also add headphones, which is really handy because the old one didn't have headphones. It was really annoying. But yeah, now you have a headphone port too. It also has a tally light on the front that goes red when you're filming, which highlights the fact that the camera is indeed recording, which I'll argue is kind of handy in some situations. Occasionally you're like, I would like to know that I'm definitely recording without seeing the monitor, though of course you can flip that around if you want, and it's a nice little addition too. There's other small quality of life improvements I really like. The actual rubber for the viewfinder used to be really easy to remove, and I've lost like 3 or 4 of these, and they cost like £8 each. So I bought quite a few of them. This is now fixed in place. Hopefully the rubber doesn't age too badly, but it's still a nice improvement. You also have a button on the top of the camera for picture controls. These are sort of the effects you can add to your images. Really nice if you don't want to do a huge amount of editing later. You can now download more of those from the imaging cloud. If you have a creator you really like, they may well have uploaded them, and you can download them directly to the camera through the app. Quite cool, really nice, easy to use, very nice. This is a hugely customizable camera. As much as you can use it in the green full auto mode, where the camera will do everything for you, you can also use it in full manual mode, in manual focus, and do anything you want. You can use an F to Z adapter and attach an old Nikon F-mount lens from the 1970s or 1960s. It should all work. There are some really old F-mount lenses that won't, but as long as they're slightly newer than that sort of original format, they'll work just fine. This is a joyous camera to use because it allows full flexibility. The autofocus is so capable. It's so enjoyable. I love the autofocus, whether it's the 3D tracking, whether it's having the tracking in automatic mode so it actually works out what you're trying to photograph and changes that type for you. It works really, really well. It's a hugely capable camera. Be under no illusion, this is not the sort of beginner's cameras like the D3000 and 5000 series. This is a serious step up from that. Loads of people have said, don't call this a mini D500. It's not. It kind of is. It kind of is a D500. I'm sorry. Yes, maybe we want a better sensor, a newer sensor, but that would have made this more expensive. I think it is a mini D500. The autofocus is so much better. I have loved taking photos of this camera. It is so much more fun than the Z50 because the autofocus is on point every single time. It's what I experienced with the Z8. The Z8's autofocus always hits, and it's so similar. It is the same as the Z6 III, anecdotally from my experience. So if you're considering the Nikon Z50II, I say yes, go ahead, give it a try. Go to a camera shop. They should have these in stock for you to play with because they are on the more affordable end of the spectrum. You should be able to play around with one and see what it's like. Get it with the 16-50 or the 18-40mm lenses. I think they're a good compromise for size and capability. The 50-250 is a nice entry-level telephoto lens as well. It's an enjoyable camera and it allows so much customization. This is a camera you can really grow into. I often say buy the highest end camera you can that's older because you can grow into it. I've often said buy yourself a professional camera, and this is the Nikon D300 from 2008. It has Nikon's professional layout. It is by all accounts a full-on professional Nikon camera, and it's a great camera to grow into and learn on. And at only £100, it's really, really affordable. Even the lens on it can be had for £30 to £40 as well. But here's the thing, the Nikon Z50 can kind of do everything that camera can do and much, much more. A lot more. In fact, I'd say that it can do the majority of what the Nikon Z6 III can. Yes, it's not full frame. Yes, its low light performance won't be quite as good. Yes, it doesn't have 6K video recording, and yes, it doesn't do ProRes or ProRes RAW or Nikon NRAW. It doesn't have that level of fancy video to it. But beyond that, it'll do the majority of it, and it'll do it really, really well. So I think this is a really good camera to learn on, to enjoy, and I think it's really nice. It's a good size. It's not too heavy at 550 grams. It's not too obvious, so you can take photos hopefully without getting mugged. And it remains Nikon's only Z-mount camera with a built-in flash next to the Z50. The Z50 series are apparently the only ones that get flashes nowadays. And with that coming back in fashion, who knows? So yeah, this is my initial impression and initial sort of review after 2 months. Should you buy one? Yes, I think you should if you're considering it. I think it's a really good camera. Equally, if you want to learn more about it, make sure you subscribe, because I do have a much more in-depth review on this coming. Equally, I also have a more in-depth review on the comparison between the two cameras coming as well. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, and if you have any questions at all about either of these cameras, make sure you pop them in the comment section and I'd be more than happy to help. So thank you very much for watching. I hope I see you in the next one. Goodbye.